Washington's heavy in the mix for top 100 recruit Aaron Butler.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Rome Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies with Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Lars Hanson, I just wrote something about this over on Inside the Huskies, but wide receiver Aaron Butler, who is ranked as the 88th overall player in the country by 247 Sports, he has decommitted from Colorado and seems to be heavily just considering Washington. You and I have talked about this for the last couple of weeks. He took an unofficial visit to Washington during the Apple Cup, and it feels like the interest has been there for a while. I know that you have a lot of, just insider information on this one. What can you tell us about Aaron Butler?
Yeah. So this one's kind of been a long time coming. So Aaron Butler, let's take a few steps back here. So Aaron Butler committed to Colorado, I believe in February, March, April, somewhere in that ballpark. I believe it was pretty early on in the season is the point that I'm getting at. Before he made that commitment, he had actually scheduled an official visit to Washington for the big June weekend in the end of June 23rd to 25th, I believe is what the initial visit was. And that was the first official visit that he scheduled. And at the time, Washington did not have any receiver commits. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. So,
no, you're correct.
Right. So at that point, and Aaron Butler was certainly a top target of Jamarcus Shepard, UW's receivers coach and everything. But once he made that commitment to Colorado and kind of bought into the prime effect and kind of just went head for it, which again, you can understand it from the kid's perspective, right? And if you're a parent, okay, hey, I want my son to go play for Deion. It's not a slight of Shepard, but it was kind of like, okay, well, that I'm not sure that's going to stick, right? Like, especially that early on in the process, right? Deion hadn't even coached a game in Colorado. So fast forward past the month of September when Colorado is the talk of the town in college football, and they lose a majority of the remainder of their games for the rest of the season, which then, you have the Sean Lewis situation, the offensive coordinator that gets thrown under the bus, not fired, let's be real here, thrown under the bus, quietly leaves, goes to San Diego State. So there's a number of offensive changes that have already happened in Colorado that now, if you're a receiver or any skill position player, you look and say, okay, well, how am I going to be used? What's it going to look like? Butler, after he took the unofficial visit to Washington, he took that visit, first of all, because he hadn't taken any visit to Washington. He had like
the January visit
in January, but he hadn't taken one since the season or since the summer, right? Since his commitment. And so that one also, his mother was able to come up with him for the trip because his dad came on the trip in January. So now both parents have been able to see Washington, but the reason why it was an unofficial, to your point, and I'm sure you mentioned this in the story, was that Washington doesn't right now have the room. Right now, in terms of guaranteed spots in the room, because Rome Odunze is more than likely gone, right? Because I don't believe he has put out the official tweet that says, hey, thank you, Husky Nation, et cetera, but he's basically done everything up to that point. So
I'm sorry, I want to jump in here really quickly because Greg Biggins over at 247 Sports did a really great article where he got to catch up with Butler and talk to him about just some of his finalists being Washington, Texas, and Arizona, which seems to be the schools that he's narrowing in on, according to this article. And when he talked about Washington, Butler did a really great job of just being honest and saying, hey, yeah, so the coaching staff said right now they don't have room for me. And so he didn't talk about Rome Odunze. He didn't talk about Jalen McMillan. He talked about Ja'Lynn Polk. So he said right now, if Ja'Lynn Polk leaves for the NFL draft, they will have a spot for him. That's a direct quote from Aaron Butler. And I thought that was really telling, not only in terms of how the coaching staff is doing a really good job of being honest with him about what's going on, but it also seems to signal that wide receiver Jalen McMillan is leaning towards entering the draft, which is something I know neither of us are surprised by. But also just that kind of signifies where the Huskies were in terms of recruiting for a while, in terms of getting 2 4-star commits in Jason Robinson Jr. and Justice Williams, who I know you and I both really, really like. I just want to make sure I got that in there. I'm sorry for cutting you off. Please continue.
No, you're absolutely right. And so that's kind of the one that everybody is waiting on, right? We honestly, of the two, we might think that McMillan would come back, but if McMillan's pretty much gone, I would be surprised if Ja'Lynn Polk comes back for a 5th year in college football. Again, if you get Will Rogers, maybe that entices him, but there's not really a relationship there, right? There's not a guarantee, like if Dylan Morris is your starter, it's not like Ja'Lynn Polk can say, hey, I remember playing with him when my first year at Washington, I'm down to play for that guy. And it's not that he wouldn't be down to play with Demo, but I think just knowing what Polk's been through in his career with the injury, his sophomore season or redshirt freshman season, however you want to characterize it, after he transferred from Texas Tech in 2021, that he put up all the numbers he needed to, despite what Brady Quinn believes. And, that's another discussion. But I think,
we'll do that another day.
But I think Polk has done enough, especially getting to 1,000 yards this season, the way he's done it. I know he had the Oregon State game. I was critical of him towards the end of the season, but he's more reliable than not, right? I don't think there's much like McMillan had the drops at some point last season, right? There's just a couple week period where these guys just kind of just check out for a game or two.
It's something that happens to everybody. Like you can't,
Right. So aside from Rome Odunze, but that's why Rome Odunze is the top 12, 10, 5, 8 pick, right? But Polk's right there, right? Polk absolutely could be a first round pick, right? He's got the size, he's got the prototypical NFL body, got great hands, smart kid, great kid, all that. So I think with Polk going, that certainly opens up that spot. And then if you're Butler, that's an easy place to slide right in. You got Giles Jackson. And the key reason that this all matters about Polk is because Butler is enrolling early. So he's going to enroll in January, wherever he goes, whether it's Texas, Washington, or whichever third school you mentioned, Arizona. Right. And pronounce the Arizona receiver last name.
Tyrone McMillan?
Tyrone McMillan. Thank you. I'm like, I know it's McMillan. I know I can nail McMillan, but T McMillan. That there's precedent set to where, okay, I can see Butler going to Arizona with the snaps and everything like that, get a bunch of early playing time, things like that. Texas, I think the Sugar Bowl might decide that one, but again, the Sugar Bowl's on the first. He's got to have his decision made before then. So I think if you're Washington, and the way that I've been reading the situation, I would be surprised if the spot doesn't open up that Butler doesn't take it. Like that's kind of been one where, hey, as long as we're not forcing anybody out, as long as, we're not, they did everything perfect, right? You brought him up for the unofficial. You didn't bring him up for an official before it was too early and then, waste your case and then have to bring him up for an unofficial in the second or third week of December. So they've done everything correctly. I think it's just a matter of timing that gets Butler to Washington.
No, I agree. And one of the other things that he mentioned in the article with Greg Biggins was he said that if Ja'Lynn Polk decides to come back, that there would still be a way for Washington to find a way to take Aaron Butler. So, and that was one of a really telling thing, not just with how this coaching staff is doing a really good job of trying to find space for him, because there is no world where Aaron Butler, who as I said, is ranked 88th overall in the country, who'd be the highest ranked recruit to sign with Washington. There is no world where you say, yeah, we don't have room for you. We can't take you. That cannot happen. That would be malpractice on the part of the coaching staff. So they will find a way to take him. He said that they'd find a way to move around some defensive scholarships to make sure that they could get a commitment from Butler. I wouldn't be surprised if, we see a couple guys enter the portal on the defensive side of the ball, whether it's grad transfers or whatever else. So I think that would probably be just a way that they're going to try to find to make it work. The question is, can they close the deal between now and when the early signing period closes on December 22nd? And Lars, we are going to, do you have anything else to add? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I'm honestly more surprised that scholarship ain't coming out of the running back room, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, that's something that will also probably find a way to resolve itself. But Lars, we are going to move on to some defensive line recruiting, since people, all our everydayers here on Locked On Huskies are asking for us to get way more into recruiting. And don't worry, we've got you covered. But first, we're going to take a second here and talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophies, also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. And as usual, whenever we talk about recruiting, we got to give a shout out to the best recruiters in the game for your small business, and that's our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Sticking with the theme of recruiting here, Lars, we're going to move on to the defensive line because there are two players that we need to talk about. We're going to probably talk a little bit about the portal, but two guys that we need to talk about. The first one is 4-star commit Dominic Kirks, who has an official visit set to USC. I believe it's supposed to be wrapping up as we record this on Sunday, December 10th. So that's one guy who we should keep an eye on him over the next week. But then the other one is the biggest fish left out there on the West Coast that is not committed. And that's 4-star defensive tackle Jericho Johnson, who just finished up an official visit with Oregon. And where do you want to start here? We can just kind of bounce around from those two guys.
Yeah, I think Kirks is kind of the one where initially when we talked about it off the air, where it's kind of a bummer if you lose him, but it's almost like you kind of knew that it's been coming. I mean, he took some form of visit, right, to Ohio State earlier in the year during the season, even after the Oregon game. Yeah. So, okay, like you're doing everything you possibly can. Now, the problem is, and this is kind of why I wanted to make that point about Butler and the unofficial versus official visit thing, is because Kirks had taken his official to UW in June. So he could not come out during the season to Washington for any of these games. He would have to come out on his own accord, on his own dime. It's kind of hard to ask when you're all the way out in Ohio. So it's easier for those guys to go to, Michigan State and Ohio State, make those shorter drives to see those campuses. And it just kind of seemed like, Kirk's like.
Well, remember, he did take an unofficial to Michigan State during the season, which seemed to be to watch Washington during that game. But you're right. It's not the same as coming out to Seattle.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and based on how that game Michigan State went, whether he stayed or not for the entire game, I don't know. But the other thing has been that he hasn't been belaboring Washington, right? Like he hasn't been like poo-pooing them or anything or disrespecting anything, but he also hasn't been like outwardly vocal about them. Like, just to me, it seems like a guy who's like, hey, like, I wouldn't hate it if I went to Ohio State. I wouldn't hate it if I went to this or that school. And so I think now with USC coming in the picture, also going to the Big Ten, I could see that scenario where, okay, if UW's willing to lose him to USC, similar to how USC was willing to lose to Washington several years ago, I could see Washington, especially with the advent of the portal, saying, all right, you know what? That's fine. We'll keep the relationship the way it is. If it doesn't work out at USC, you can transfer here in a year or two if you want, because the relationship is there, right? And they're not dropping him. Like they haven't publicly dropped him since he took those visits. But it does kind of raise the question of, okay, well, how truly committed are you? Jericho is the one where we, initially thought, hey, for a while it was going to be Washington, and then it was going to be USC, and then it was going to be Oregon. I think now it's fair to say Washington's probably second or third, or closer to third.
Probably second.
Yeah. Right, but somewhere in that range, and then pick whichever one you want to put ahead of them. And I think kind of it more or less gets back to the options in the portal. and the preference of the coaching staff, right? Like, not that they don't want Jericho Johnson, right? Not that, like, this isn't about Jericho. This is more so about, hey, if we see a 1-year grad transfer and a former, Alabama player that we have multiple relationships with the coaching staff with, why not put our interest and energy into those guys, knowing that, well, one's automatically gone after next season, and then the other one you can build and sustain, but they've already been in college football, whereas you have high school prospects, which, again, that's kind of where coaches have to make the decision. Well, is it worth going with a 4-year out of high school or seeing a guy who's already in college and we just want to give him an opportunity?
So I like what you're saying a lot. And the two guys that you're referencing would be Pennsylvania defensive tackle Joey Slackman and Alabama transfer Isaiah Hastings. So I like that you mentioned both of those guys. And I feel like another name that we should throw into this conversation as well is Vanderbilt grad transfer Nate Clifton, who I think is pretty interested in Washington. But so I like what you're saying for a couple of reasons. I think Isaiah Hastings is a fantastic developmental prospect who could get a lot of time early on, and the coaching staff could kind of just see how he plays out after just getting buried at the depth chart at Alabama, which is going to happen for a lot of these top recruits. Not saying that he's not talented at all. But then I think that this coaching staff might prefer to go the portal route and get, say, both Slackman and Clifton, because what they need right now is bodies that can make an impact right away. And I'm not saying that Jericho Johnson can't do that, but it's a little bit more of a question mark than it would be with guys like Slackman and Clifton, where Clifton being an SEC transfer, same with Hastings, and Slackman being an Ivy League transfer with first team all Ivy League last year. We're getting a couple guys like that in the building where they can just say, yeah, we're only going to be here for 1 year. You can still focus on developing guys behind us. I'm sure, like, a Javon Parker, maybe an Armon Parker too, would step into a bigger role as well with those guys in the room, depending on, it seems like just from comments that he's made, I know both you and I talking, that Jacob Bandis might be a grad transfer candidate after the season. So there's just going to be a lot of experience that is needed up front, and allocating those resources to the portal, which is just becoming a really vital just part of recruiting and roster construction for all teams, not just Washington. Just putting your resources there would be a better way to sustain that success than saying, all right, we're going to take Jericho Johnson. And I'm not saying that, one route is better than the other. It just feels like this is the route the coaching staff wants to take, is we're going to take these guys that have proven it at the college level, and we're going to invest our resources into them while still developing a really talented class. We talked about edge rusher Noah Carter before the show, guys like Ratuman Abula-Balavu, who I'm really big on. Omar Khan, a defensive tackle from Texas, is somebody who could be a really big impact player within a couple of years. In that same vein of what Tooley does, where he's just an impact run stuffer, he seems like he could be that kind of guy. So they can still develop players of that quality while saying, all right, Slackman and Clifton can come in, start right away, play for a year, go to the draft, and help mentor guys in the same vein that Jabbar Muhammad is doing with the cornerbacks right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the more apropos ideal route if you're the coaching staff, right? And the other thing, not that the coaching staff is ever going to say this, but in the NIL world, if the total amount going to high schoolers is okay, like this is how much you're going to need to get this guy versus these guys in the portal. It's like, well, if there's a difference of 200,000 or 300,000, coaches are always going to lean on the ones that have experience in the game in college already. And it's about, Kirby Smart mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, where he said, so what is your portal viability? When we sign you out of high school, how likely is it in 2 or 3 years or in a year or two from now that you're going to be here still on the roster trying to develop and continue your career here? Or are you going to jump in the portal at the first sign of trouble, right? So I think there's a lot of coaches where, again, it's not that they don't care about the kids, right? But it's like, okay, well, if the kids are already not sure that they want to stay at the school, why not go get somebody who, like a Michael Penix, right? Where it's like, hey, we're going to install you a quarterback. We'll still develop guys behind you. We're still going to bring in Austin Mack. But Austin Mack knows, hey, we're probably going to bring – I told you this going into the season. They're probably going to get a transfer portal quarterback, and now they're in for Cam Ward and Will Rogers. So I think no matter what, the staff has proven we want to get both veteran upper-class talent that can start right away and then get the key 4 stars, like Austin Mack was a 4-star. So still get those guys in the building and let them develop naturally so that in a year or two, Austin could lead and it won't be as big of an issue as saying, hey, you're starting defensive lineman next year. It's Armon and Javon Parker. No disrespect to the Parker brothers, but that starting unit versus that second wave unit is a massive difference.
I agree. And that also it comes from making the move for the Big Ten, where now they're going to have to play Michigan next season. They have to play Penn State next season, where from watching some of the games that we have this year, those teams just love to run the ball downhill. And having a experienced and deep defensive line is going to be very important. And we've seen the coaching staff say, we understand this. We're going to go get 5, because right now they have 5 commits on the defensive line. So they understand that. But and some of those guys, like I know you and I have talked to a lot of these defensive line recruits, like Keanu Wilhite, for example, said, yeah, they want me to come in and compete for reps early. And we haven't even talked about guys on the roster that we think that could step up and make a contribution next year. Like we could see true freshman right now, Elenius Davis, step into a bigger role. Anthony James, who's making the move to defensive tackle from edge rusher. Zach Durfee, we could see what kind of role he might play on the edge. Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Himes. There are bodies that are already there, but it's about adding more experience and having some of that short-term, that short-term stopgap to help bridge the gap to these guys as they step into that bigger role next year. All right, Lars, we haven't been able to do this yet. We've got some basketball to talk about here on Locked On Huskies. And after just an impressive top 10 win over Gonzaga, we are going to get to that. But first, we got to give a shout out to our good friends over at PrizePicks. So speaking of basketball, PrizePicks is the most fun you can have, winning up to 25 times your money this football season. And now you can play during basketball season too. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. Do you want to play alongside of some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Testing your skills on PrizePicks is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Do you want to get in on the action? Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Basketball talk. Lars, you were at the game last night. Washington upsets the number 7 Gonzaga Bulldogs 78-73. And I know we haven't talked a lot about this team recently, and you've been at every home game so far. And what have you seen? What did you see from this team last night? And just what do you think that this team could be going forward in what's a really big year for Coach Mike Hopkins?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think that this team came into the season probably one of the most veteran teams that I've covered in recent memory, right? I think all but 2 or 3 players are grad transfers on some level, right? So you got Moses Wood, Keon Brooks Jr., Xavier Wheeler,
Paul Mulcahy,
Frank Capdonza Sr., Wilhelm Bradenbox is a junior, so I guess he's one junior. But there's like Anthony Holland is a grad transfer off the bench at guard. So the point of what I'm getting at is Hopkins built this team basically in his ideal image, in the sense of, hey, I want all veteran guys. Which, even though they still have Corin Johnson as a sophomore, Nate
Wesley Yates, we haven't seen yet.
So Wesley Yates actually, for the first time last night, was out of his boot and shooting in warmups.
Okay.
So that's a good sign there. Hopkins kind of took the opposite end of that and slammed his hand into the scorer's table at one point during the game. And it had to be, I believe, well, he said this is via Tim Booth of the Associated Press, but via the UW radio postgame show, that apparently Hop had to go to the hospital after the game. Now, we were in the room saying, well, hey, he's going to talk to us first, right? Like, but and I posted the video on Twitter on my social media account about, Hop talking about the injury, and you can kind of see where he was laboring through it a little bit. But it was one of those games last night where that was the game Washington had to have. Gonzaga at number 7, they're not truly a number 7 team in the country, right? So they're not Arizona, right? They're gettable, right? and especially with Washington having such a veteran team. It took, I mean, they were down 6 at half. They were down 11 early in the second half, midway through the second half. And then out of nowhere, Nolan Hickman disappeared. Gonzaga's shooting, which was fantastic in the first half, disappeared. And Washington was able to make enough plays in the end and pull that victory out. And that's a big one for Hop, because had Hop lost that one, I'm not too sure there's much else in there for
the
him.
season starts to spiral really quickly.
Right. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because like this is something I want to talk about, because you talk about Washington being down 11 at multiple points in the second half, and this isn't the first time we've seen them claw back from a double-digit deficit. We saw them do it against San Diego State in Las Vegas, and while they didn't win that game, it was something you and I had a discussion off the air about, where one thing that we agreed on was Mike Hopkins coached teams of previous years don't do that. Whether it's due to the talent, whether it's due to the coaching, you can probably blame it on a mix of both. But for whatever reason, when that happened, that team would find a way to lose that game by 25 points. And that hasn't happened yet this year. They haven't really been blown out of a game, which is something where am I missing one?
No, you're not. No, I would agree. Like that was the same thing last night, where it's like, yeah, this is an opportunity for you to just say, hey, and again, for all the talent that they had last year, with Keon Manfield Jr. and Keon Manfield and all that stuff, when you have younger players like that, you don't have the ability to match that energy and say, hey, look, we're a veteran team. You're to coin a phrase, to borrow a phrase from Kalen DeBoer, you're built for this. Like, they, in a way, like when you have so many grad transfers who are, I mean, first of all, you're not talking about just grad transfers. You're talking about 2 Kentuckys, 1 Rutgers, who's the other one that I'm missing in that? I mean, Frank Kaplan from Oregon, who was already on the roster, so he didn't just transfer in. But I think having him, that is the one difference for me. Where if you don't have Frank Kaplan, if you don't have Kaplan, you don't beat Gonzaga. I mean, his 4 blocks in the second half alone, get that win.
No, you're right, and I feel like we saw a big shift last year when Frank Kaplan got hurt, where we saw some he's such an intense player, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He's so much fun to watch. I really do love watching him. And you could feel like a shift in the energy of the team last year after he got hurt, where Braxton Mia had to be relied on to basically do everything at center, where there weren't a lot of other big men on the team, where having somebody like Wilhelm Breidenbach, who doesn't necessarily have a huge role in this team, but just having that extra guy down low who can just do a little bit more seems to help. Braxton Mia, he's been kind of hit or miss for me this season, but it still feels like not having to ask him to do as much is really helpful. But you're right, that veteran mentality of this team does so much. And I think as we start to move into Pac-12 play here, that this team really could surprise some people. They shoot the ball better than we've seen in a long time from these Mike Hopkins teams. And if they just find a way to stay competitive and stay in these games, who knows what they could achieve. And in a year where, let's be 100% honest, if Mike Hopkins does not make it the NCAA tournament this year, he's probably not going to be coaching this team next season. I don't say that to be harsh. I say that to be real. That's absolutely what the case is here. And if he does make the NCAA tournament, I'm sure that he's going to have to do it again next season to get any kind of extension, if that, from athletic director Troy Dannon. So it's nice to see that he's brought in some of these veteran pieces and that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing right now, where they're moving the ball better than we've seen them do in a long time. They're shooting it better, where all the pieces are there. And now it's about putting it together in conference play, which I'm starting to think this team can do that.
Right. You're absolutely 100% right on that. The funniest part is, if I were to tell you, so I don't know if you know what the net rankings are, right? The kind of the new way of determining the better teams in college basketball. Yeah. Who do you think the top 4 teams are net in the Pac-12?
Arizona is 1.
Yeah, okay,
for sure.
Good job.
Thank you. I know. That was a real bold prediction for me here. I would probably say USC might be up there. No, so is Washington?
You got a U right.
Utah.
So it's Utah. So I believe it's so Arizona, Utah, Washington State.
Oh, interesting.
and then Washington. Now that's in terms of that's top 4 in the Pac-12, right? That does not mean
in terms of that.
There is a gulf between Arizona, who is number 1 in the NET rankings, and Utah, which I believe is in the 20s, and then Washington State's 35, I believe. I want to say in somewhere in that ballpark, and then UW is, I believe, 55. They moved up 6 spots from 61.
But that's a good sign, and that's just a step in the right direction. And is it sustainable? We'll see.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge question. But I feel that all the signs early on are good, because last year we saw this team play too close with inferior opponents. We saw them lose to some inferior opponents, which we haven't really seen this year. Like there are a couple of games it's like, oh, that wasn't pretty, but we look at losing to Colorado State, ranked team. Losing to San Diego State, really good team. Definitely not the same team that was in the national championship last season, but a good team. So, and there's 2 of the 3 losses right there. And I'm totally blanking on who the third loss was.
Nevada.
Not a bad team either.
Tournament team last year. So yeah, you can get away with it.
So, but that's a really good sign, I would say.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's the thing, is I thought last season Hop was done, but because of the buyout and who the AD was and how she managed it and all that stuff. I mean, again, Hop gets a clean slate, good talent roster, should make a deep run in the Pac-12 tournament if everything goes according to the plan with the injuries and things like that. I mean, if they're a top 4 or 5 team in the Pac-12, I mean, that's the other thing. They're a deep team. So there's no question, as long as they don't get hit with a bunch of injuries, they should be able to make a run this year. Just a question of will they?
No, I agree. The scoring off the bench is going to be huge that we haven't seen in previous years. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. It's awesome. I've been getting like a lot of messages like on Facebook and Twitter recently being like, hey, I'm a new everydayer, but I love the show. And it's really cool just to kind of see how the show has grown in such a short time. So thank you so much for all that. And if you're new to the channel, hey, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you like the content, please feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We are everywhere, updating this channel every day with new content. So please make sure that you like the show. Leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. Leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns. We try to get back to as many of you as we possibly can. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you on